Hello, 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 and welcome to Dialogues About Death with your host, Chris Miller.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Chris.
Welcome
Can
out
you believe
there.
this is our sixth episode?
Man, how time has been flying.
It has been totally flying. So, right off the bat, I want to make sure that everybody knows that this is a show sponsored by Thomas Miller Mortuary and Crematory. And this is the website, thomasmillermortuary.com. And if you ever have any questions that you don't want to ask on the show, their staff is amazing. And you can call the Corona Chapel or the La Sierra Memorial Chapel in Riverside, and they'd be happy to answer your questions individually. But just a little housekeeping, Chris. I want to make
Yes,
sure that people know that they can ask questions during these shows live. And if
absolutely.
right, and then if somebody thinks that somebody else needs to hear this, if you guys could share it on your page so more people get to see the show, that would be fantastic. And today we are talking about the cost of death,
Yeah.
which sounds a little like people are like, "Ooh, that's crazy." And we came up with all kinds of fun titles. But
Yep.
people, one of the biggest things, Chris, that people look for on the internet when you look in the back end is they're asking, how much does a funeral cost? What does a burial cost
Sure.
versus a cremation? What does my veterans benefits pay for? Do I need to prepay? Like, so I have all these questions that have come in that we're
Yes.
gonna we're gonna ask you today. Is there anything you want to say before we get started?
No, I let's delve right into it because it's a topic that really needs to be discussed, and a lot of people kind of always are kind of weird about talking about it. But there's a lot of differences between costs between funeral homes and also around the country. There's different costs because of just the demographics of the United States.
Sure.
So we'll
Yeah, and
delve
things
right
that
into it.
exactly. In California, things are a thousand times more than they are in Utah, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Okay, let's get into it. So the first question is, what do funerals cost? And I will let you answer that.
Sure. So we kind of break down in a couple ways because when we talk funerals, that's just kind of a large, kind of generic term. But if we break it down into like cremation services or burial services, the range can vary depending on what the services families are wanting. So if we're talking burial services for a funeral, they can range anywhere from about, I would say, $4,500 on up to over $10,000. On average, here in California, the average funeral is somewhere probably between $7,500 to $9,500, and it all depends on what the families are wanting. We have our flat rate of services, but then depending on what the merchandise they choose, and merchandise is such as like a casket, a vault, a headstone, the flowers, all the other things outside that complement the funeral, that's what the price would go up. So we have our basic fees of our services that we offer families, and then the families can choose and kind of figure out what price level that's within their budget, depending on the merchandise, depending on the type of either metal casket or wooden casket that they choose. Now, if we're going towards cremation, cremation can be a little bit more economical if you're just doing what we call a basic cremation, where there's not like a ceremony or anything like that, or families may just want to come in and do a little ID viewing prior to their cremation. So those costs would range somewhere between maybe $1,500 to $3,500 for basic cremation. And then there's also cremation with ceremonies and services that can go up to into the five, six, seven, $8,000 range. So cremation can be just as much as a cost as burial. It all depends on what the family's wanting in regards to the merchandise that supplements their funeral services.
Awesome. I'm so sorry
Yeah.
if you heard that. I was making sure that the show was playing live on your page. So that is very interesting. I think a lot of people have this preconceived idea of what things cost, but when they really realize it's not as expensive as they think, that's
Sure.
really helpful. I appreciate that. Another question that came in. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have
Sure.
something to say?
No, no, no. Go right ahead.
Also, people ask, like, because they might have some benefits. Like, we're going to get into veterans as well, but let's talk about Medicare. And does Medicare cover basic funeral costs, or is there certain things that it does?
It doesn't. When it comes to Medicare, Medicare is for while you're living through your health care supplements, but Medicare does not cover any funeral expenses whatsoever. And a lot of people think it does. And that's where when people say, well, I'm on Medicare, it'll cover my service. And we're like, no, unfortunately, it doesn't. It only covers, like I said, health care and anything while you're still living. So that's kind of I wanted to get that out there to let people know. Medicare only covers you while you're living.
That's very interesting. I know that's something that has come up lots of times. By the way, we have some people here on the show, which is exciting. Good morning, Kathy.
Nice. Good
That's
morning,
awesome.
Kathy.
And Sissy as well, both on your team.
Wonderful.
I love that they came.
Yay.
Oh, yes, and Becky. Thanks for coming back, Becky. I love
Morning,
it. Good
Becky.
morning. And Erica as well. Good morning and
Wonderful.
happy Friday. I love it. So again,
Great.
if you guys have any questions on any of these topics, we would love for you to answer them because Chris just loves to answer questions that aren't scripted, right, Chris?
That's right. Just right off the top of my head.
Oh my goodness, it could get crazy in here.
It could.
Awesome. So actually, we just had a question come in that is very interesting that I was actually going to ask you. Somebody just asked, "Can I prepay?" And let's get into that one because I think that a lot of people want to know if they can do it now. What
Sure.
would be the benefit of that?
Or there's a lot of benefits to prepaying and pre-planning your services, especially these days as inflation goes up and prices continue to go up. It's hard to control our costs, but with the benefit of pre-need, you can pay and or begin to start paying for your funeral because there's like a payment plan when you do pre-needs. And so if you kind of put all your funeral service wishes together and you come up with a price, and say you come up with a price of about $8,000 for your service, you can go ahead and put a payment plan together, and you can pay for it over like a 3, 5, 7, or 10-year period. It locks in the price of the services and merchandise to your funeral service. So whatever you pay today for your casket and your services, it won't go up in price because that pre-need insurance will grow, and hopefully it offsets and grows at the same rate of inflation. So your family doesn't have to pay the increased value of that like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. There will be a small amount that the family will have to pay for under what we call the non-guaranteed items. The non-guaranteed items are expenses or costs outside of the direct funeral home, such as death certificates from the county, sales tax from the state, if there's flowers, if there's like honorariums and clergy, music, limousines, escorts, those things that are help supplement a funeral aren't directly part of our services, but they can put money aside for those things. The family would just have to pay for the difference. So, for instance, say an escort costs about $200 today, but maybe 15 years from now it costs $250. The family would pay the difference of like $50 more for that. So it really does relieve the burden off of a family of having to come up with thousands of dollars where they just might have to come up with a couple $100.
That's really good to know. And you said the word escort. What does that mean? Is that a police
Escorts,
escort?
yeah. So motorcycle escorts. So sometimes families will want to get from point A to point B. So either from the funeral home to the cemetery, motorcycle escorts get us from point A to point B.
I love that. That's awesome. And also, as you said, you're paying for today's prices versus prices that could go up. We recently did a lunch and learn, and somebody said, "Oh, I prepaid for my wife and I 30 years ago," and we were so excited for them because they
Yeah, no
paid
doubt.
so much cheaper for the same
Yeah.
service that they would get, right?
Yeah, and just to kind of let you know how the price of funerals, they almost double every decade. So if you purchased a funeral today and you're going to live another 10 to 15 years, your funeral costs will double in 10 to 15 years from now. So if you can afford setting money aside now to prepay for your funeral, you'll definitely be ahead of the game down the road. And I always usually tell families before they get onto a fixed income, before they retire, it's so important that they pre-plan their funeral and prepay for their funeral. Because again, when you're on that limited income, you may not be able to afford that extra $200 or $300 a month if you're making payments on that to lock that price in. So I recommend, again, doing it before you get onto a fixed income or you retire.
I love that. And I think the main theme there is that again, when we're gone, we don't have to worry about it, right? We're hopefully going to be in heaven. But it's our children or the
Yes.
people who are left to take care of the clean up everything. If you and you're leaving a burden to them if you don't take
Yeah.
care of it. And I think
Yes.
that's something that we don't think about. We think, "Oh, they'll just deal with it." Well, yeah, you
They,
could saddle them with I mean, anywhere between a $2,000 to a ten to a $20,000 bill, and
Absolutely.
that's not a legacy that you would want to leave. Definitely,
No, 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 you
yeah.
don't.
So another question that came in, and you kind of
Yeah.
touched on it from the first question, but I thought we'd get in there because a lot of people say, well, if it's not a religious thing and they don't have to be buried, in a casket, is
Sure.
cremation a better idea? So this was a question that came in. What is the price difference of burial versus cremation?
Well, to be honest, it could be actually identical, and cremation could actually be more. We have some families with cremation even spend more than some of our burial families. So when it comes to the merchandise, some families might have just a basic memorial service, which might be $2,000 or $3,000. But then they might buy a bunch of keepsake jewelry and urns and memorializations, and they might spend $6,000 or $7,000 on just the keepsake jewelry, urns, and memorialization. So some people might put more in the memorial or the remembrance of their loved one when it comes to the keepsakes than they do for the ceremony. Some people might spend more on the ceremony. They might spend thousands of dollars on a ceremony but only just buy a little basic urn for a couple $100s. So every family's different. Every family values each part of the ceremony or how they want to remember their loved one. So they whatever they value it is, and the beauty of our company is that we offer a huge line of keepsake memorialization. So when families come in and we talk to them about their loved one and all the services and items that they want to do. We take them into our merchandising room where all the different urns and keepsakes and jewelry are, and a lot of families will choose something individually for remembering their loved one. If it's a special, like maybe it's a butterfly urn, or it could be like a little rose keepsake. So it could be like a golf ball for dad, something. So we have a lot of different themed uh, items that can really elaborate a service. So it all depends on the value. I have some people coming in and are like, "Oh, I don't want to spend a lot of money on a service. Mom and dad didn't want me to spend a lot on this." So they go really basic, and then they spend the $6,000 or $7,000 on keepsake. So value is different for each individual, and so I tell my staff, it's like, we're here to educate, and we try to give everybody all the options that we have available to us to explain and educate the consumer, so then they can go out and make a decision where they feel the most value, and then they feel comfortable in making that decision when we give them all those options.
I love that because it's true. It's completely on them. You're not jacking up the price of their funeral. It's whatever they want to do. In fact, when I was
That's right.
meeting with your lovely staff, Kathy, I believe in La Sierra, she was telling me that people sometimes bring in their own container for if
Sure.
they decide to cremate. And she said there's this one family that their dad loved a specific type of tequila. And so they brought in an empty bottle of tequila, and that's where his ashes were placed. And so,
Sure.
obviously that didn't cost them anything except the cost of the tequila. But
That's
I just
cool.
thought that was interesting. And you mentioned something that maybe people who haven't been into your funeral home would know. Like when you say keepsakes, I thought it was really cool that you can take the ashes and they can be formed into diamonds and
Yes.
stones and art, like these beautiful glass swirly things, and that
One
is
glass.
all, like, from the remains of your loved one, or
Yeah.
jewelry that, like, has, like a little, it
Oh,
it just
okay.
can't what tell me about that, and the
Well,
thummies. That's so
yeah.
cool.
So sometimes if people aren't being cremated, but they want to have a keepsake of their loved one, what we do is we thumbprint everybody that comes into our care at our funeral homes. And so if a family is wanting a keepsake of their loved one, we can have their thumbprint or one of their fingers taken, and what we do is we do an imprint of them, and then jewelry can be made, and we have a whole assortment. So it's just not pendants or rings. It could be cufflinks. We even have like little pocket knives and money clips and all sorts of little things, touchstones that people can put the thumbprint of their loved one on to remember them. So they don't actually have to be cremated, but we also have jewelry that you could either put your loved one's photograph on. You can put their name and dates on there, and we have all sorts of theme things, so you can really personalize all those keepsakes when it comes to your loved one and remembering them in the way you want to.
I love that. Oh, we
Yeah.
also have Keyshawn coming on. It's so
Morning,
true,
Keisha.
right? It's so nice. And that's what's the beauty of your staff is that they aren't pushing anything on people. They're just saying
No,
we're, as you said, it's an education process of what the possibilities are. And that's what's cool about pre-planning, even though I mean the whole purpose of this show, and we jokingly say we're taking the ew
yeah,
out of death because people get kind of weird, like, oh, dialogues about death. But when you explain that this is a platform that you can ask those questions that maybe
yeah,
you're afraid to ask, but you can do it kind of anonymously.
that's
Not,
right.
you're not right. So, but I think it's important that we ask these questions and get all that settled so you can relax and know that there's nothing to worry about and there's
That is
nothing that
correct.
your kids are going to have to worry about. You have decided what you want or what you don't want. I mean, have you found that? Is that people say, I definitely don't want these three things?
That's true. So when people and the other benefit of pre-planning is that when you put your wishes down and you say you want to be buried, your family can't change your wishes to cremate you. So if you're really adamant about either burial or cremation, pre-need is definitely a must for you. So then your family can't change those wishes of disposition after the time of your ceremony. Now, if a family member, say you paid for a full service with a viewing and stuff, and the family at the time that you pass don't want to have a viewing, they don't have to have the viewing. I do encourage a viewing because I think viewing is so important for the closure and the loss of your loved one. But families, sometimes mom or dad might have lived to be in their late 90s and they outlived all their friends and they don't want to have a church service, but maybe they just want to have a graveside service. So they can still have the ceremony and maybe modify it a little bit. But when it comes to disposition, your family cannot change the disposition, which is a really important thing. Also, to let you know, just for your own peace of mind, that they can't change it if you've paid your pre-need ahead of time.
It's really good to know. That's awesome because
Yeah.
sometimes families don't always end on the best note, unfortunately. And so, if something is important to you, I think it's awesome. In fact, I just realized that Christina is also on the show, which is
Wonderful.
awesome, and she's the one who was telling me about the tequila bottle. I thought that was awesome, and she showed
Nice.
me all kinds of theme stuff. They have like cowboy boots
Yeah.
and all the different like it's a wild thing. It's a whole new world. But good morning, Keisha. We're so glad you could be here.
Good morning.
I love that your staff is coming on to support you.
You
Okay,
bet.
let's ask some more questions.
You
Okay,
bet.
so we already talked about burial versus cremation. If you can prepay for your funeral,
Yeah.
what is Medicare cost, which we found out it doesn't. Let's talk about this is kind of not completely funeral related, but when a person dies, when does Social Security?
About Social Security. So Social Security does have a small benefit. They haven't changed the amount of the benefit in almost 40 years. It's a couple $100. I believe it's still like $275 is a survivor's death benefit. And it only goes to a surviving spouse. So it's a one-time death benefit to a surviving spouse from Social Security. Now, if you have minor children or children that are disabled and your spouse passes away, that's where Social Security benefits will supplement you earlier, so you don't have to wait till you're 65 to receive your spouse's benefits from Social Security. So we help our families process the Social Security. So what we do is at the time of a death, we process and remove their Social Security number from the system, which will alert the Social Security agency to go ahead and modify and adjust any benefits that you're entitled to, depending on your family situation. Now, as I mentioned, if you have minor children or disabled children that are living under your household, you would have to go apply for those once we submit your deceased loved one's Social Security number. So after probably about 4 to 6 weeks or so, you can start that process once you have the death certificates in hand. But we do start the process. It's just that if you have a special circumstance, you'll have to apply for that at the time.
Well, that's really cool to know that you cancel the Social Security in the system because that's another fear that I have heard from people that people are going to scam the family by taking the identity of the person that's passed away.
Yes.
And so the fact that you handle that, and then even though there's some things the family have to do directly, you educate them and tell them where to
Yeah.
go and what to do, right?
Yeah, we have a whole form that has the Social Security Department's number on there, and it kind of gives a little list of the benefits they would be entitled to if it applies to them.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. All right.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're there holding their hand, it's not like they're on their own trying to figure it out and
No.
they're like punished tax wise or whatever,
No.
a couple years later. You help it sew it all up and get it all done, which I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Well, we just talked about Social Security and we also talked about Medicare. Now let's talk about veterans benefits, because sometimes people think, well, my husband was a veteran. What services do I get as part of that? And also as a spouse, after they've passed, what
Sure.
benefits do I have as a spouse? So would you answer that?
Absolutely. So when it comes to veterans benefits, there's a couple different categories. First, if you're an active duty vet, well, you wouldn't be a veteran. If you're active military, and unfortunately you pass in the line of duty, the government will get your body prepared to bring you back to your hometown, and then they will give you an allotment of $7,500 to pay towards the funeral service of your local funeral home. But the government will give you the casket. They do the shipping arrangements of giving you back to your hometown. Then you have all the benefits at the National Cemetery. So really, $7,500 should cover all the expenses because all the preparation, everything has been done prior by the military. So that would save the family a considerable amount. Now, when we're moving to veterans, those that have already served honorably and they have an honorable discharge from the government, and this would be for a man or a woman that has served in the military, their military benefits would include burial at a national cemetery. And it can be their local cemetery or it could be one outside of the state. We would just have to apply for that. They also would include, and they also could be either buried or cremated, and their ashes be interred at a national cemetery. If we're going towards either one, it also includes a headstone for the veteran. It also includes, if it's a burial, it would include a burial liner or a concrete box that goes over the casket at the cemetery. Uh, Also, we would help apply for military honors for the veteran. And so then they would have an honor team present a flag to the family at that time. So that would be the veterans benefits. Now, if there's a spouse of a veteran, the spouse has the same privilege of being buried at the National Cemetery, and they would be buried with their veteran in the same grave. Or if they're being cremated, they have what they call double niches, and it's kind of like a mausoleum or an area that the urns can go into. They also do ground burials for urns, but you can put them in the wall, and they always allow enough space for two. So it'd always be enough room for the veteran and their spouse. So when you're looking at the cost of cemetery, the cost of a liner or a vault and the headstone, you're looking at anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 per person as a savings that the government is giving a veteran and the spouse. So it saves a considerable amount of money when you're using that. So I would say if you are a veteran, you definitely would want to take advantage of using a national cemetery of your choice. And we have some beautiful ones here in Southern California. We have one here really close by in Riverside, which is one of the largest national cemeteries in the United States. They just opened up a new one in Miramar, just north of San Diego. And then there's another one in Bakersfield area. The Los Angeles Veteran Cemetery and the one in Coronado and San Diego, those are both full, and they don't do interments at those two cemeteries anymore. But the other three are wide open, and they're wide open for decades to come. So we have plenty of room for all of our veterans in the local area to inter them and their spouses at one of the cemeteries of their choice.
That is really interesting. I had no idea that they would be full. I mean, I guess that makes sense. It's real estate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so the LA one is full, and what was the other one?
The one down in San Diego off Coronado.
Wow. Oh, well, I
Yeah,
get, yeah, there's limited space.
yeah.
Interesting. Well, with more people doing cremations now, does that help save space? Sounds weird,
It
but
does, and some of like with in LA and San Diego, they tried to maximize it. So over the last few years, they tried to put in some more niche areas to put more urns, but they've maxed that out now too. So that's why they opened up Miramar down in San Diego, since there's a large military presence down in that area, and then Bakersfield is kind of in the central part of the state, so it kind of fills up this region also. I know there's been talks about them opening up another one here somewhere within Orange County or LA County again. But we that's only been talk, and it all is about government funding. So we'll see. Maybe in the
exactly.
next 10 or 15 years, we'll hear some more news about another veteran cemetery coming. But the Riverside one, it'll be open for at least another 20, 30 years. They've got plenty of
Oh,
space out there. So I
oh,
think
great.
there'll be plenty of space for our local veterans here in the Riverside County, San Bernardino area to be buried out there in Riverside.
That's nice. I know both my parents and my in-laws are buried at the Riverside. Now they're both in the Navy, and I thought it was interesting. My mother-in-law passed away in 2020, not from COVID. Just she was 90 years old, and
Yeah.
that's such a dear lady. We miss her. But anyways, when we went to do the graveside, her husband, my father-in-law, had a wall, right? And
Yeah.
they opened it up and there was his urn and
Yeah.
the gentleman who was helping us, and it was raining, we were under umbrellas, it was very cinematic. And he said, "Would anyone like a picture of what it looks?" I mean, it didn't change because it was
Sure.
encased,
It
right?
was the case.
And
Yeah.
so everyone handed him their phone and he took pictures. And then when they put Teresa's urn in, they were just right next to each other, and he took
Oh,
another pic, and it was just, like, so dear that he took that
that's nice.
extra
Extra
step to
little.
know that we would want to know that they were okay
Yeah.
in there. I know that sounds silly, but
Oh, that's nice. That's very
yeah,
nice
it
of them.
was very nice. Yeah. So, very, very cool. Okay, well, that kinda comes to the end of our questions, and we answered so many today. Is there
Hey, we
anything that
did.
you think that, we haven't answered? Because it's amazing, Chris. I mean, the volume of questions online, because
Sure.
people want to know this stuff and there's not a place that people can really ask and feel safe. So thank
Sure.
you for taking the time to answer it. Is there anything else that you'd want to add before we end
Yeah.
the show?
I guess just a couple things. When you're looking at funeral homes, and a lot of people go online and look at funeral homes, and prices range considerably. I think you need to take into the effect the full picture of what you're getting into, the staff, the facility, and who you're working with, and who there are funeral homes that might be a little bit more costly, might have a higher overhead. Their facilities might be a little bit more elaborate. They might have more licensed staff, and if you're a licensed staff, that means you pay more to those people to work for you. Some funeral homes are what we call more of a storefront, or like mom and pop, like just a storefront. So it's not a full service funeral home, and they might use third party providers, so they keep their overhead low. So they might be able to provide a lower cost funeral, but they're not doing the services themselves. They're using third parties to do that. So ask questions when you're talking to a funeral home. It's like, where is your loved one? Are they kept in your care, or are they kept somewhere outside the city? Because sometimes third party providers have to contract with other funeral homes that aren't close by. And so your loved one may not be at the facility that you're actually working with. So I would just say, do your research, ask your questions to the funeral home when you're calling and inquiring about pricing and questioning, where my loved one is, and what is all involved in the services. We try to explain to the families there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes on in coordinating, putting on services, because sometimes people say, why does it cost so much? Well, when I pay all the proper insurances, the workers' comp, all the liabilities and things, I have full coverage. So those things, when you're properly insured and you're properly licensed, you're going to have a few more fees to make sure that the job is done properly. So I just make sure that families, when they're inquiring, ask questions about those types of things, of what else all entailed. Sometimes it's also the size of the facility. Some funeral homes have small chapels or smaller facilities. And if you have a big family, you might have to go to a larger funeral home or go to your church off site. So sometimes the size of the funeral home can dictate the price, the size of the staff. Also, if it's independently owned by a mom and pop, or if it's corporately owned. the corporate structure, there's a lot of wonderful employees, people working for corporate America, but sometimes they have to rely on the bottom line because they're a corporation. They have to work to the bottom line to making budgets. Where mom and pops are a little bit more flexible in working with families if they have to. So there's a little bit of a difference between independent mom and pop funeral homes and corporate funeral homes. So those are just some items I wanted to just put out there. So when you are out there talking to your funeral home, when you're needing those types of services, ask those types of questions. And hopefully those people that are answering them will be truthful and honest with you and let you know, because we're here to educate. We want to make sure our consumer is well aware of all the different options that are out there, and they have a choice to be well informed to take care of their loved one.
I love that. Something that I learned recently, Alex, who is giving, we had a Valentine's party at our local assisted living place, Valencia Terrace. And she said something I hadn't heard before, that, a lot of times when you're at a big funeral, corporate home, again, as you said, there's nothing wrong. It's just a
No.
different structure. You
Yeah.
can have many funerals happening at the same time. So when somebody gets there, they're like, it's like a wedding hall. Like, which wedding are you in? Right. And so you have
Yeah.
to do that. But at your facility at Thomas Miller Mortuary, you just take one a day. So that family feels, or one at a time, I should say,
One at a time.
one
Yes,
at a
one at a time.
time. Right. There might be somebody in the morning, afternoon, evening, but
Yeah,
I
that's
thought it
correct.
was lovely because, you're making them feel like family. What caused you to create that policy?
To doing one at a time, it just with our place, I mean, we can accommodate one full service at a time on site, but we might do something at a church off site. So we have enough staff to have two services at a time, but we never overlap services at the same time. We feel every family should be treated with dignity, should be treated as an individual, and they should have their space and their time to celebrate their loved one, and a time for mourning and grieving also. So we're very purposeful in making sure we spread out the times of our services. So we only do, one or two or three a day, and we spread them out amongst all of our facilities or even around the community. So then there's no overlapping. And we're having to work with cemeteries too, because cemeteries are working with multiple funeral homes. And so sometimes when you get to the cemetery, there might be two or three services going on. So the cemeteries also have to work with scheduling also, because the cemeteries also want to make sure that the families have their private time too. They don't want to have two or three services going on at the same time, because everybody deserves their own special moment in time to celebrate and remember their loved one.
I love that. And so it's very respectful. And I think, as we talked about at the last show 2 weeks ago, on grief, I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I don't need to do all that, but they don't have the closure.
Yeah,
And then sometimes that extends their grief because
they're
they
grief.
just they
Yeah,
haven't dealt with it. And so when having a service, no matter if you pick burial or cremation, you can tailor make your service any way you
yes.
want. And also you do sprinkling at sea as well. Is that right? Would that be like an extra
We can
service?
do That would be a service, and we do private scattering at sea. But then, if the family wants to charter a boat, we have a couple companies that we work with that we can refer them to, either in Orange County or LA County, that they can go out and charter a boat to do a scattering or sprinkling of ashes and do a little ceremony that way. So, yeah, that's a different option. That could be a different topic for another time of dispositions of cremated remains.
Fantastic. We just came up with a new topic. I love
There
it.
we go.
Well, that's the thing. If anyone is watching currently and they think, oh, I didn't get a chance to ask this question, or, oh, I'd love you guys to talk more about this topic, we would love that because we're
Yeah,
doing two a month. And we just want to be able to be available to answer those questions and give people the peace of mind that everything's going to be okay. And
yeah,
that you have someone like Chris and his wonderful team to take care of you in your time of need.
that's right.
Oh, and the last thing I'm going to say is that you brought up that I just want to expand a little bit. You said when someone is in your care, so the
Yeah,
person that has passed on, when they come into the Thomas Miller family, so to speak,
yes, yeah,
they are with you through the whole thing and they are tracked. So like they have a bracelet or something that able to know where your loved one is at all times, because sometimes that's a
yes,
panic, like,
yes,
especially if they passed away on a cruise ship or on another state or
yes.
country. and they're on their way to you, like, where are they? Where are they? Can you talk a little bit more about the process that you use to make sure that you always know where they are and how you communicate that with a family?
Sure. So what we do is when once a loved one is brought in to our care, if they pass away at home or at a facility, we typically put an identification band on there. And typically, if you're in a hospital, you already have an identification band on from the hospital, and then we'll put a supplemental one on just for our own purposes. So that person is being kept under our care at our facility in Corona, and then that tag, that band, stays on them for as long as forever. We don't remove it under any circumstance. So we can always identify the body itself, and it goes so that always stays with the body. Then when it comes to if a person is being cremated, they still have that band. But also at the time of cremation, then we designate a number, a coin. And so there's a coin that actually goes in with the cremated remains. So that coin, that number is put on to their all their documentation for cremation, and then that coin is then put in with their ashes. So then we know that that coin represents that person after cremation. So there's the two types of identification that we use. We use the ankle brand for all our clients, and then when it comes to cremation, after the person has been put in to be cremated, we from the band, since the band has been cremated, then it transfers to a number of a coin, so then the person has identification.
Wow, that's really interesting. I had no idea. That's
Yeah,
really cool. Okay, awesome.
yeah,
Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much, Chris. This
you
has
bet.
been episode 6 of Dialogues About Death, and some people have nicknamed it Dad, which I think is
Dad.
interesting. But it's today is the cost of death. So thank you for really diving in and giving us your very transparent
Yeah,
pricing and what really goes into the cost, and knowing that you can do whatever you want for yourself or your loved one, and you have every choice, either cost effective if you want to do it very frugally, or if you want to be completely elaborate, and have a
that's
golden,
right.
or
That's
you
right.
can do
Yeah, the
whatever you
families
want.
control the families control their costs, and there's no need to go broke. People don't need to overspend for a service, but
No,
they should do something that fits within their budget to memorialize their loved one.
I love that. I love that. All right, Chris. So we are at the end of our show today. Thank you,
Yeah,
everybody who came on. We were so grateful to do
thank
that,
you.
for you guys to do that. Take your time for that. And we will see you in 2 weeks at our next Dialogues About Death. And until then, you guys have a blessed day.
Bye bye.
Bye.